I work in a building that has extremely high security, the kind of place where you don't just stroll in. Every hallway, every corner is under surveillance. To get to my office, you have to pass through 4 separate doors that all require keycard access. By the time you're inside, you feel like you've walked deeper into a vault. The environment itself adds to the unease. The walls are stark white, cold and sterile. The floors are smooth gray concrete that amplifies every footstep. The ceiling is open, exposing ducts, wires, and the occasional flicker of fluorescent lights. The silence is heavy, broken only by the hollow echo of your own movements. It's the kind of place where you can hear your breathing a little too loudly, and you're always aware of how alone you are. One Saturday night, I was working late. Everyone else had gone home hours ago, and the entire building felt like a tomb. My office was lit only by the pale glow of my computer screen, and the silence was so thick that even the hum of the servers down the hall felt unnerving. That's when I heard it: footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty corridors. At first, I thought maybe it was security doing rounds, but then I saw him. A man walking past the hallway outside my office window. He was wearing a shirt that looked exactly like the ones our maintenance staff wear. But there was something off. For one, it was the middle of the night, way past the time maintenance would ever be scheduled. And instead of the standard black uniform pants, he wore jeans. It looked like he had thrown together half a uniform, just enough to blend in if no one looked closely. Something about him made my stomach knot. His movements were casual, but there was no purpose to them. He wasn't fixing anything, wasn't carrying tools. He was just wandering, almost searching. I shut my office door quietly and locked it. From inside, I could still hear his footsteps echoing back and forth, up and down the hall, pausing every so often right outside my door. At one point, I saw his shadow stretch across the frosted glass window. He lingered there longer than he should have, as if he was listening. Then the handle rattled. Slowly, deliberately, as if testing to see if it was locked. I froze in my chair, every muscle tight. My office suddenly felt smaller, suffocating. The hum of the fluorescent light above me was deafening. I didn't dare move. And then beep. The electronic chirp of a keycard being scanned against my door. It failed. He tried twice before walking away, but I could still hear him pacing the halls. Each echoing step was a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I thought. For nearly an hour, he wandered, and every time his footsteps grew near, my heart pounded in my throat. I kept imagining what would happen if his card suddenly worked, if my office door swung open and that shadow slipped inside. Later, security finally intervened. The cameras caught everything. The man wasn't maintenance at all. He was the grown son of one of the employees, and he had used his father's handyman card to sneak inside, looking for anything valuable to steal. What he didn't know was that handyman cards are extremely limited. They don't open offices. They only work if you make an appointment and someone escorts you in. His father's card simply wasn't enough. That's why my door never opened. He was caught on camera trying, though. The keycard attempts were logged and security traced them back. The man was fined for trespassing. His father, unfortunately, lost his job. But the part that still haunts me isn't that he was caught, or that I was technically safe the whole time. What unsettles me is the memory of sitting alone in that silent building, listening to him just outside my door. The sound of the handle rattling. The faint electronic beep of a card reader failing. And knowing that if security protocols had been just a little different, if that card had been programmed with one more level of access, I wouldn't be here telling this story. I work at the Discovery Channel telescope, out in the middle of the Coconino National Forest. Out here, the dark is honest. It doesn't apologize. It just fills everything: trees, sky, and the steady mechanical hum of the observatory, until you forget where the world stops and the night begins. A typical shift is quiet. Just me, the telescope operator, and an astronomer taking long exposures. 2 people, a lot of equipment, and miles of nothing in every direction. We're tucked inside steel and glass, pointing a hungry lens at stars that are older than the trees around us. The building feels safe in its own way. Sterile rooms, locked gates, signs reminding people that the facility is off limits for 1.5 miles. The rules are there for a reason. One night in hunting season, sometime after midnight, the speakers in the observation deck picked up something I'll never forget. A deep, resonant bugle, an elk calling into the dark. The sound filled the feed like it belonged there, like it had always been part of the night. We listened. You could hear it crunching through the brush, heavy footsteps close to the security fence, and for a while the animal wandered the perimeter, curious and unbothered by our small human light. It lasted maybe 30 minutes and then the bugling faded. The elk wandered off. We thought nothing more of it. Nature happens. An hour later came the shots. Sharp reports that cracked through the forest and made the hair on my arms stand up. Gunfire, a sound that did not belong anywhere near our posted boundary. The facility is clearly marked. There's no hunting for 1.5 miles around. Signs, laws, lights on the fence. None of that stopped the shots. They came from somewhere in the trees, close enough that the echoes bounced around the building and settled into every hollow space. Not good. The astronomer was committed to his long exposure that night, 2-hour frames that you can't just stop if there's a noise. So I did what felt right. I took my headlamp, the red LED so I wouldn't ruin the night vision, and started walking the inside perimeter of the security fence. I moved slow, ears open for the echo of deer or elk, eyes peeled for any glints of reflection in the low light. The red beam cut through the black like a fingertip tracing the fence line. All around the facility, eyes glimmered back at me. Hundreds, it seemed, their gaze reflecting faint like distant little moons. They stood just beyond the mesh, as if they were waiting for something or trying to slip into the shadows that the fence created. It felt like they were gathering to hide, hiding from the gunfire, hiding from something else that had come up the hill with a taste for meat. It was eerie, yes, but explainable. Wild animals obey instinct. Not the worst part. Not yet. I finished my walk, told myself it was all normal, and went back inside. The hum of the equipment felt reassuring. Time moved in long exposures, hours stretching like film, and once more I returned to the night. Another hour crept by. The shots had stopped. The elk had gone quiet. The facility settled into a heavier silence, the kind that presses against glass. I went back out again, same slow walk, same red light bobbing. The eyes were gone. No glints, no hoof prints near the fence. The dark looks different when it's empty, colder, almost expectant. I was about to step through the gate when I heard a sound that was wrong for that time and place. Someone clearing their throat. Not a brush, not a branch. A deliberate human sound, close enough to hear the rasp. He was standing on the other side of the fence, right at the entrance. His silhouette was a smudge against the trees, half hidden where the mesh met the shadow. He wasn't in a hunting blind or set back on a trail. He was at our gate, watching. "You seen dem elk round here?" he asked. His voice was casual, like he was asking for directions. But there was an edge to it, a need. "I've been watching him come up the hill. Really need some elk." He said need, not want. Need. The kind of word that doesn't leave you feeling safe. I told him I hadn't seen any. Told him the elk had been earlier, that they'd moved on. He stared at me for a beat and then, like something snapping, he called me a liar. "You protecting him?" He spat, as if I were personally hiding the animals from him. He stayed there until twilight, long enough for the sky to wash out the stars, and then wandered off into the trees. Not aggressive in a movie way, just present, patient, like a predator that might wait until the gate was unlocked, until someone left a light on, until a door stuck open for 5 seconds too long. We reported him to the Forest Service the next day. They told us we weren't the only ones. There had been reports. A man going onto private property, staking out porches, waiting for animals, even watching people. He phoned in a kind of hunger. After that, we installed IR cameras at the fence line and beefed up security on every entrance. The observatory became more fortress than place of learning. Motion sensors, heavy-duty locks, night vision feeds that show the same trees in green like a world inverted. The elk still come sometimes, quieter now, and the cameras pick up movement, the slow march of hooves, the glint of eyes. But every so often the cameras show something else. A dark figure sitting on someone's porch, a shadow moving too human to be animal, a face that watches the gate and waits. We're lucky perhaps that the man never crossed the line. Lucky that we had fences and signs and a rule-bound system that made it hard for a single keycard or a single person to get inside. Lucky that the elk wandered off the first night. Lucky that the astronomers' exposures continued undisturbed. But luck is a brittle thing. Out here, the forest keeps its own time, and people who wander in with that kind of need are patient. They remember where the posted boundaries end and wait right outside them until the moment someone forgets to lock up. So when you think of the night and the quiet hum of machines and stars older than memory shining down on a small patch of human industry, remember that sometimes the thing that watches from the trees isn't the wildlife. Sometimes it's just a man who believes he has a right to what the night provides. And sometimes he asks with a soft voice by the gate if you've seen dem elk. And you answer truthfully that you haven't. But you never really know what he's willing to wait for. You don't know how long patience takes when someone needs something that badly. They say places keep memory. Stone remembers weight. Wood remembers footsteps. And buildings with a long, ugly history remember the things people try to forget. My workplace is one of those places, an enormous, brooding structure that used to be a monastery, later turned into a madhouse, and then for a slim, dark stretch of time, a hospital for SS personnel during the war. The facades are stern 1920s brick, long corridors that fold into themselves, archways like ribs and grotesque sculptures, dead monks frozen in stone watching. On paper it's beautiful, antique even. In person it's a different story. At night the architecture turns clinical and hungry. The arches cast long teeth of shadow, and even the floorboards groan in a language that sounds older than our work. I usually work until 3 in the morning. Most nights I'm the last person leaving, the halls emptying behind me like the slow closing of a book. One winter night the wind was a living thing. It howled through the courtyards and found every crack in the window frames, making the whole building complain. I locked my room, checked the latch twice, and set off for the exit. The lights were out. Hallways were black gutters. My breath fogged in the air with each step. The quiet wrapped itself around me, the serious quiet of an old building that expects reverence. Then I heard it, running footsteps in the distance. Not one pair, but many, stomps beating a rhythm down a hallway I couldn't see. They sounded like a school of fish all moving together. The noise rushed down the corridor and then nothing. The hush fell back like a curtain. I stopped. The hairs on my arms lifted. For a second, the building felt crowded with invisible bodies. I took a few stairs down into a lower passage. There, at the far end of a long, dark hallway, tiny red lights blinked, brief pinpricks like eyes, then vanished. They didn't belong. Red is a color that screams in the dark. It doesn't fade politely, it stays in the corner of your vision, reminding you that something is there. For a moment I thought of candles, ritual lights, and then the rational part of my brain shoved that thought away. This place has history, yes. but it also has plumbing and people and stupid, explainable things. My pulse sped. I walked faster toward the exit. The wind seemed to push the building around me and my boots echoed like drums. Then the running began again, closer this time, and then a corner, and the world erupted. A dozen kids barreled into me, screaming. Cold air, bright red beams, laser dots scissoring across my coat, kids shrieking like banshees. I nearly had a heart attack. They were laughing between screams, wild and terrified and delighted all at once. For a second I stood there, chest heaving, and then looked at them. Teenagers in hoodies, faces flushed with the heat of exertion, red LEDs blinking on their vests, toy pistols strapped to their hands. They looked back at me as if I'd been the ghost in their game. One of them pointed a small gun and said, breathless, "Dude, you scared the crap out of us." It turned out they'd borrowed keys from a parent and decided the old building looked like the perfect arena for a midnight game. Laser guns, red lights, running through the dark corridors because the sound and shadows make grown halls feel like playgrounds at night. They thought the place was deserted. We all thought different things in that instant. They thought they were hunters. I thought I was being hunted. The laughter that followed was a weird kind of relief, loud and irrational. One kid swore he'd seen something move behind a column. Another swore the statue blinked at him. The grotesque monks were suddenly part of their story, as if the past had slipped into their play. I told them to get out, to go home, to return keys, to never ever do that again. They stumbled into the night, breathless, still giggling and half scolding each other. After they left, the building felt bigger and somehow emptier than before. The shadows remembered the feet that ran through them. I stood at the stairwell and let my heart slow down, trying to tell myself that history didn't chase people across hallways in the middle of a Tuesday night. That men in uniforms and dead monks won't rise because teenagers borrowed a key. Still, for a long minute, I could swear I heard one more soft sound. Not running this time, but the faint echo of footsteps that didn't belong to the laser game, footsteps that belonged to the building itself. Maybe that was only my imagination. Maybe it was the settling of ancient stone. Sometimes the scariest moments are the ones that begin with the most ordinary explanation. Sometimes the people who walk in the dark are just kids with toys. Sometimes, though, ordinary explanations don't feel enough. And if you work in a place built of memory, you learn to respect both the present and the past, to lock up a little faster, to check behind doors before you turn them, and to treat tiny red lights in the distance with the suspicion they demand. So if you ever find yourself in an old building with a history that tastes like iron and old paper, remember this. The thing that startles you might be completely harmless, might be laughable. It might be a kid with a key and a laser gun. But it will still jolt you out of your skin the same way a ghost would. And for that night at least, the madhouse that had held violence and sorrow and ugly architecture let out a short-lived, ridiculous laugh of its own, then settled back into memory as if nothing at all had happened. But the statues still watch. The dead monks keep their eyes on the halls. And the keys that people borrow for fun are keys that were once used for decisions far less innocent. So when you leave, lock the door behind you. Always. Because you never know which story will come back for an encore. I've never told this story to anyone. Not really. In 20 years as a locksmith, you see things. You go to houses in the middle of domestic arguments, businesses where partners turn overnight into enemies, and places where someone's life has just changed because a manager had to lock a fired employee out. I did all that. I worked Fridays I hated. I learned to move fast and not ask questions. People love to tell me places are haunted. I used to smile and take the job, fix the lock, hand over the key, and get the hell out. You learn to be practical. You learn to treat fear like a job hazard and move on. Out of all those calls, only once did I actually feel like the air in a room belonged to something else. Only once did I walk into a place and know in my bones that the house was not pleased to have me there. I spent the first 15 years working around Metro Atlanta. Then I moved farther out to a stretch of road that could be pretty busy during the day but got quiet at night. This house sat right along that main road, 1930s brick, the sort of plain, stubborn house you drive by 1,000 times and forget to look at. From the outside it didn't scream haunted. If anything, it was ordinary. But the shrubs were overgrown, the trees leaned as if they'd been pushed by a single slow wind for decades, and the shadows pooled like old coffee. Inside was something else. It looked like someone had remodeled it in different eras and never finished the job. Rooms stitched together with mismatched trim, angles that didn't line up right, doorways that led your eye to weird corners. It had an architectural nausea to it, a feeling that the room itself hadn't decided what it wanted to be. It was disjointed in a way that made the skin rise. When I opened the front door, the air felt wrong. You know that little tingle when a cold draft hits your neck? This was the opposite. The air felt static, as if breath itself hesitated. In every house I'd worked in before, an open interior door would slam from pressure changes. Someone opens the back door and the other doors bang. Not here. Not a slam. Not a gust. The doors sat like they were glued. No sound moved the way it should. I walked into the kitchen and nearly scared a carpenter to death. He'd been working on trim and smelled of sawdust and coffee. He looked at me like I'd turned the lights on in a funeral. "Fuck," he said under his breath. "I can't wait to get out of this place." He gathered his tools and left before I even walked back to my van. He didn't need to explain. When a grown man who eats nails for breakfast says a place gives him the creeps, you listen. From the moment I re-entered that house, something was watching me. It wasn't just the echo of footsteps. It was a pressure behind the eyes, an attentive, patient attention like a hand hovering an inch from your shoulder. Several times I felt that electric reach, like when a stranger slowly drifts their fingers toward you and you sense the motion before it happens. It's a small, awful thing, the way your nerves announce intrusion. I hated it. I moved faster. I worked faster. I wanted the cylinders in my bag back in my van and the engine running under my hands. Job done. I closed up and left. On the drive back I tried to be reasonable. Old houses have odd drafts. Drafts make hair stand up. Maybe the carpenter was a coward. Maybe I was just tired. But I couldn't shake that feeling of being overlooked earlier, of the house watching me pack the last of the locks into my toolbox like it had been watching me all along. Here's the strange part. I had passed that house 1,000 times. It sat right on a main road I drove for work every day. Yet I had never noticed it. It was like a trick of vision, there and not there, until that night when its edges stepped forward and refused to be ignored. A couple of months later I realized something else. Even when I was actually looking for it, when I knew where it was, I still almost missed it. It was as if the place didn't want to be seen. A few weeks later, back at the shop, a tough-as-nails coworker, former Marine gym rat, the kind of guy who chews through fear for breakfast, walked in. He told us he'd been to that very house that day. I watched his face when I asked him about it. It changed. Not like he was quick to fake being scared, but like someone had asked him about a wound he'd rather not reopen. He looked like he'd seen something larger than he liked. He said it was the creepiest house he'd ever been in. That's the thing with the kind of places we go to, sometimes you don't talk about them. Guys like us trade stories, we swap warnings, and then we move on. But neither of us went back. There are other details that don't make the story less unnerving, they just sit there like small splinters. The way the light hung in certain rooms, too thin, too patient. The smell, not rotten, not old exactly, but something stale and domestic, like towels left damp on a rack for months. Pieces of wallpaper peeled in an intentional pattern, almost like a finger had been tracing the seam for years. Small things. Tiny indices of time and attention. Little proofs that someone or something had been keeping watch. I told myself what every practical man tells himself in those moments, that it was memory. Houses remember the people who lived in them, how they walked, where they sat, the arguments that happened at 5 in the morning. Memory can cling to a room like lint. Maybe the place remembering felt like eyes to me. Maybe the overgrown hedges hugged the windows the wrong way. But even as I reasoned, I kept checking the van keys twice. I kept the engine running longer. I slept badly for nights. People like to ask if I believed in ghosts. I would tell them no because it sounded professional. I'd say I believed in cold drafts and settling foundations. But belief isn't the point. The point is that that house got under my skin in a way no other had. It made my hands shake slightly when I tried to put the last cylinder in place. It made me walk faster down the driveway when I left, and I watched the rear view until the brick receded into shadow. If there's a moral here, it's a small one. Keep your keys close and trust the hair on your arms. If a place makes a carpenter quit mid-job and a Marine make an ugly face when they remember it, then there's something worth listening to. People shrug at stories like mine. They smile, they say, old houses, and they go on. I understand that. I used to be one of them. But there's a difference between a building that looks spooky and a building that asks you quietly to move along. The latter keeps its doors closed for a reason. It doesn't want to be seen, and when you do see it, you don't always want to look back. I never went back. I keep my tools in the van. I keep my van locked. And every now and then, when I'm driving that same road, I glance at that stretch of brick and brush and I wonder if it remembers me. Sometimes, in the corner of my eye, I feel that old sensation, the pressure, the reaching, and I think maybe, for a moment, the house is thinking about the man who came and made its locks obey. But I never tell this story much. I don't like the way it sits in people's faces when I do. I don't like the small silence that comes after. The one where listeners imagine what reached for me and never quite say it out loud. So I keep it tucked away, a pocket of metal in a toolbox. If you ever drive by a house that seems to move out of the way of your attention, do yourself a favor. Slow down, lock your doors, and keep going. Some places want to be overlooked. Some places, when seen, don't like it.